The idea of living in space is an idea that's been portrayed through a lot of different media, and the possibility of it actually happening in real life at some point is something that will probably happen, especially if we destroy the Earth, which again is something that will probably eventually happen. But I've always been slightly bothered by how living in space was shown. Like, take Star Wars for example, which was really when this whole space lifestyle thing really started to get popular. The spaceships or space stations or any other space vessels that are shown here are always very empty. Now I get that a lot of the places shown are usually places where all the serious action is taking place. Also, there's usually a war going on. It's in the name after all. And war is usually not the best time to be thinking about interior decorating. And so, because of this, we don't really ever get to see your average Joe's space apartment. Instead, we get things like the Death Star, which I think is pretty understandable why we don't see any couches and paintings around the place. And whenever the inside of someone's house is shown, it's always on a planet or some run-down desert or a swamp. Now, I'm not really into Star Wars, and there's just so much Star Wars media out there that I could very well be missing a nice comfy shot of a well-decorated space hotel or something. But as far as I'm aware, whenever the inside of a location is shown, it's always cold and empty. Heck, even the places that aren't in space are still fairly barren looking. Like, look at this place. You've got a bed and a chair and some ornament statue things. Yeah, this is obviously not the peak of interior design or comfort. And you might be thinking, maybe this is just a Star Wars thing. Maybe other movies are where all the interior space decorators are. And really, I never watch movies, so that could very well be the case. But something I am really familiar with is games. Only this time, because it's a game, you get more of the ability to look around for yourself. And let me tell you, it's the same case as Star Wars. Even places that are more meant for spending time in are still very dull. And no, it's not just because they're abandoned and filled with dead bodies. Even at their peak, I'm sure they were just as bad. Even something like Star Citizen, which allows you to customize your hangar, does not, as far as I'm aware, allow you to customize your spaceship in any way. Whether it's Alien Isolation, Mass Effect, or Starfield, I have yet to find an actual comfortable and cozy space place. And so, why is that? Well, that's what I decided to try and figure out. Now, the biggest reason you don't see couches or bookshelves in cars or planes is also the same reason why you don't see them in spaceships. There's just not enough space, which is kind of ironic, but yeah. And that may be an acceptable excuse for most. However, there are no excuses for the big ships, especially not space stations. And if there's something I've learned from sci-fi, it's that they really like their big spaceships and space stations. Like seriously, some of the ship sizes for these things are absolutely absurd. And you're telling me you can't be bothered to hang a single painting anywhere here? Seriously? Alright, so what about gravity? It might be a bit difficult to hang paintings on the wall when the walls could also act as the floor. Imagine positioning one room to all face a certain way, only to realize you must have got it rotated the wrong way, because now the rest of your space house is facing the other way. Yeah, it'd be so much simpler if you could just have gravity enabled or something. And that is a possible thing that could exist. To have gravity in a spaceship, there's just one problem. Well, you know how Earth has gravity due to the speed at which it spins? If Earth just stopped spinning, then everything would just kind of float away. The fact that it's spinning so fast is what makes gravity. And so for a spaceship to have gravity, it would need to do the same thing. Yeah, it might be fine on the inside, but if you have any windows or view outside at all, it would just be a complete spinning blur. I don't care how good you are with roller coasters, you'd get sick in no time if you had to see this outside your window every day. Also, you'd have to turn it off or something every time you wanted to enter or leave, because trust me, there is no way you're getting into something moving that fast. I also feel like there's something kind of grand and elegant, or even kind of ominous about spaceships and space stations. They're just this huge, impossibly complex and powerful piece of machinery that has the ability to travel through the vastness of space at incredible speeds. And so, to just see one spinning like crazy, like something just went wrong in the physics engine, it really ruins the atmosphere. But even if getting gravity this way is not something you want to use in your sci-fi setting, there may still be some other ways. Even now, physicists are still finding more and more possible ways that could generate some sort of gravity. So, even if it's still far from happening, I feel confident in using gravity in sci-fi settings. It's far from being the most unrealistic thing, at least. And so, even if you don't have gravity and aren't able to do things like paint the walls, because if you don't know, paint in space will break apart into many bits and flakes, which is so hazardous to breathe in. Things work surprisingly different in zero gravity. So yeah, even if you have to be careful about using stuff like paint and whatnot, you can still have pillows and drawers and cabinets, right? Well, maybe not, because another thing you have to consider is weight. You see, when launching into orbit, you really want your spacecraft to be as lightweight as possible. The heavier it is, the more it costs, and these costs are very high. So if you're going to be decorating your space place, make sure it's a place that doesn't ever have to lift off again, like a space hotel or space station. Just something that can stay in one place forever. Well-furnished ships and rockets are unfortunately kind of out of the question. But at least you can still have a nice comfy sofa and desk in your zero-gravity space station. Well, actually maybe not, because remember how paint is unacceptable in zero gravity? Yeah, well, same thing can happen with the fluff and hairs from wool or fabric. Even wood, unless it's like the smooth, polished type, could very well break apart somewhat. You can forget that nice woolly rug and rustic armchair, because unless you've finally got around to installing zero gravity, you're going to be very limited by what furniture you can use. Though I'm sure there are still many alternatives that could mimic the aesthetics of wool and wood without any of the dangers. Again, this is only in zero gravity. If you've got gravity, which many sci-fi spacecrafts seem to have, then you have no excuse to not at least plop down a chair or two. I don't know about you, but personally, I'm gonna decorate my space places the same as I would a regular interior on a planet. Sure, there may need to be some changes. It may be good to account for zero gravity times, or at least low gravity. Like, I could see bunk beds being a more viable option. If you were to roll off one, which is a fear I always have at the idea of sleeping on one of those things, then it wouldn't be nearly as bad if you fell off. You just slowly float to the ground or something. You probably wouldn't even notice. Low gravity would also make it a lot easier to climb up and down those flimsy ladders. Though you may need to account for the more rounded style that many spaceships seem to have. There aren't usually just sharp corners, like you would have in a house. Instead, they're usually very curved and sleek, which could look a bit awkward to place a table in front of. Another thing would be plants, as plants really liven up a room, but in space, it probably wouldn't get the sun it needs. So maybe some artificial plants, or one of those plants that can thrive with very little sun, or heck, maybe even a fungus or mushroom. I'm not sure how they would handle being in space, but I'm sure they'd get over it eventually. Though, one thing you may want to avoid decorating is the exterior. As dull as the outside of a spaceship may be, I just don't think it'd be a good idea to open a window.